So what I'm going to bring you guys today is a overview of common categories of load progression, including arbitrary or fixed load progressions and auto-regulatory. Now, these are just two tools or two overarching strategies. We can implement these in a number of ways, and both of these umbrella terms, fixed load progressions and auto-regulatory progressions, there are plenty of programs used by very popular athletes who have had huge success with these sort of programs. They just have, in my opinion, and I'll be going through them, some theoretical pitfalls that we can problem solve with other strategies that we'll more commonly use. However, you will have probably had these strategies somewhere in your programming because we're never just limited to one tool. We're never limited to one strategy. We use these tools to fix problems that each one can't fix. So they all have their own roles. So the first thing we're going to start out is arbitrary or fixed load progressions. In my opinion, on the surface level, this is the easiest one to understand, right? All we're doing is adding a predetermined weight or a predetermined percentage week to week, right? So this is my example that I've written up here. Super simple. Week 1, 2, 3, 4, 4x4s for each week. We're not talking about back downs. We're not talking about secondary days. I just want to talk about like the main primary workload for now. 4x4s starts off at 70%, and then all we do is we add a predetermined amount of weight each week. Now, for this example here, I've just decreased the weight jumps week to week because we would assume that adaptation would slow as the program goes along. Very simple. Now, we might do this with 2 kilo jumps, 5 kilo jumps, 10 kilo jumps. We might do it with 2%, 3%, 4%. It doesn't matter what it is. All it is we've pre-written down the jumps we want to take week to week. Arbitrary or fixed load progressions. Okay, let's talk about the pros and cons, and then we'll use another example. So, problems with these sort of systems. Athletes may progress faster or slower than the progression. So let's say we're trying to add 5 kilos a week to a deadlift. There may be a part, maybe week 2, week 3, week 4, whatever. There may be a part of the program where you're simply not getting better quick enough to keep up with the weight. Now, I do believe this can be problem solved. As we run a program 3, 4, 5 times for an athlete, I am able to track, and we are able to keep track of what the good weeks, what the bad weeks, what pace do we need to go to keep up with that progression. However, it does run into a bit of a issue of individual performances week to week. What if one week you are simply not strong enough to keep up with the progression, you had bad sleep, whatever it is? It doesn't have much wiggle room. It's very rigid. It's excellent for novices or intermediates while their adaptations are quick. So if you are a novice, you're simply going to get stronger every week that you come into the gym. For intermediates, you still might be able to work on your center of mass control on your squat. And that allows you to find, if you're not getting stronger in a week, because that's a pretty short amount of time, if you're not getting stronger in a week, you're getting better at the skill within the week. And so you're getting better at your accessories, which is compounding into your main lifts. And so there's always something to improve on to get you those extra 2 kilos, 5 kilos, what have you. So it's a good style of progression for novices and intermediates because it's very simple to follow. You just, okay, I'm going to try to put 2 kilos on the bar, 2 kilos on the bar, 2 kilos on the bar. Where I generally use it is I work it, and it can work for movements that you have not trained recently. So let's say you wanted to bring in a conventional deadlift, but you're a sumo puller. Well, we could assume that the first week of conventional deadlifting, you're going to be pretty crappy because it's a new movement, but that your adaptation will be very rapid. Let's say you're a 200 kilo sumo deadlifter, and then you've loaded up 120 on the conventional. We would assume that you would get better at that conventional very rapidly because your sumo is quite strong. And so we might just try to add 5 kilos a week until you can't. And that might be an 8-week progression then. You get up to like 170, something like that. It can work really well for those sort of movements or those sort of movement changes, swapping from low bar to high bar to front squats, what have you. It can also work really well in the example that I have here, where you have someone who can deadlift 310 and you give them good mornings for the first time. Their strength for that movement, their potential for that movement is going to be very, very high. They're going to be able to lift heavy weights. But their skill is so brand new that they're not going to be able to load up heavy week 1, week 2, because they have to learn and accommodate and acclimatize to the technique. But they will get strong very quickly because they have that raw strength, that raw muscle mass to carry them through those progressions every single week. All right. So you'll often find fixed load progressions in your accessories in the more complicated ones. Good morning RDLs, high bars, front squats, leg presses, stuff like that. Now, this is a more common problem that I see with this program, and that is weight can outstrip your technical skill. So what that means is, let's say you were squatting at 140 for 5, And as soon as you go to 145, what you find is that your technique just gets a little bit worse, but you have to do that 145 for that week, and then you have to do 150, and then you have to do 155. The problem with this is that you can technically move the weight up and down, but when it comes to the skill at the moment, we actually see you decreasing in skill as the weight is increasing. I call this no man's land training. You're kind of getting stronger, but you're actually also getting worse, which means we're kind of like getting a bit stronger, but we're also getting a decreased skill. And that just ends up with less weight on the bar for our maxes anyway. So it's a bit of a, there is a place for maybe training at a sort of weight, a load that does challenge your technique. However, if you have to do that 2, 3, 4 weeks in a row, now we're just getting worse as athletes. We're getting worse at the skill, and that is not what we're after when we're training for powerlifting. Now, last thing, it can accumulate fatigue unpredictably, which impacts the rest of the program. So if I go in the first week, I'm doing, let's say, 210 on a deadlift 4-5, and the last week of the program, because I'm jumping up by 10s, I'm doing 260 for 5 for the deadlift. Week 1, that deadlift, that 210 is going to be so submaximal, I'm going to be fresh for RDLs, for leg press, for lunges, whatever else I have to do. But by week 4, I'm at 240, it's freaking heavy. Now my RDLs suffer, they're not going anywhere because I'm just really fatigued. I'm taxed, my lunges suck because my adductors are cooked. 250, 260, those last 3 weeks of the program, I'm probably sacrificing a lot of the productivity from the rest of the program because now I have this big source of fatigue at the start of my session with those deadlifts that's unpredictable. Basically, it makes the rest of the training program very variable week to week. And we don't like that idea because we're not going to be able to produce the same sort of progress we can on the rest of the little bits and pieces in our program. And we're going to kind of have this different athlete system coming to the gym week to week with different levels of fatigue, different levels of skill, right? And this creates some more difficult problems when it comes to observing what sort of progress the program's actually created for you. Let's go to my next example. So this is one of my implementations of this strategy. This is a poorly written one, but it should get the point across. Usually if I use this strategy on a main lift, it is for novices or early intermediates. My implementation of this strategy will often be quite submaximal, which means you're nowhere near failure. And when you are getting into those hard sets, they are followed by a really easy week. And so this is to mainly accommodate that predictability in the fatigue accumulation. And often I'm also modulating the volume, how many sets that you do at the same time. I often use percentages for myself, but I will use flat weight as well. So just add 5 kilos, depending on how experienced the lifter is. If they're new, then I usually use just weight increases, not percentages. If I'm using an accessory movement like an RDL, I'll usually use weight increases. This is what we refer to as a top-down approach to programming. It's basically like, here's the system, follow it, right? It is great because it takes a lot of the guesswork and thinking out of the program, but that is also a net negative. It's going to be harder for you to learn how your body responds to things when you're not actively interpreting your own training. So this works really well if you're an overshooter or undershooter. Now, these are terms that basically mean you do something, you lift it, you either interpret it as heavier than it actually is when you watch it back. So you're like, those squats, they were the hardest thing I've ever done. You look at the video and you're like, oh, I probably could have got another 5. Or if you're an overshooter, and that means you're supposed to do like a 7 out of 10 effort for the week, and you end up pulling near your max because you're just like, oh, it felt a bit too easy. When you don't have an accurate interpretation of one of your lifts, it is actually an easier or safer strategy to follow kind of a very particular set out percentage to keep yourself from over or undershooting week to week progression. This can also, and I'm not going to go too much into detail, this can be a very end game approach. So I said it's for beginners and intermediates. It can also be for the extremely advanced, because once we have a really nice view of how you progress at an individual rate, we've tracked many cycles yielding really good responses every time. What we can do is we can get your progressions down to the exact percentage number of where you need to be in week 1 and where you need to be in week 4. Maybe someone with a longer torso, creates a little bit of fatigue from deadlifts, needs to move from 62% for 4 reps to 77% for 4 reps. And that's their progression. That's where they yield the best results. That is very fancy, takes a while to get there, but I just want to keep that in mind that those strategies aren't just for beginners, they can also be for the very advanced, where we really have a great idea of what we're trying to go for. The example I have here is just 2x8s. If you've trained with me before and you've come into the gym, this is something that you might be familiar with vaguely, just poorly written, as a program similar to what you may have run previously. So 2x8s, then 2x5s, and then 2x2s from week 1 to week 5. The volume, the amount of reps or work that we're doing is dropping off as the weight is increasing. All we've done is done a flat increase in the percentage. So you're going 60, 67%, 75%, 82%, and 90%. Depending on how big or small those jumps are, we can have many different theories that we're trying to implement here. But with this one, I just want to keep it really simple for the example. So you can see it just gets heavier each week and then the reps go down. I could talk forever about these sort of strategies, but I think this gives you a good idea of what your fixed load progression or arbitrary progressions are. And then what we should have is you'll have your own fixed load progression if this is a strategy that is used. And you should have your own theory about why those jumps have been in there, why they're the amount that they are, how many reps are there, what are we doing with the reps, what are we doing with the weight, what are we doing with the weight jumps, how long is this, all of these things should have a purpose, but that's what a fixed load progression looks like. Okay. Next thing we're going to talk about is our auto-regulatory, but I'm going to do that in a separate video because this one's run a little bit longer than I thought it would.